it's not even just the gaming industry. I mean, consumer web, the amount of money or the amount of data that people give up about themselves every day when they pick up this thing, right?
Yeah.
And they do everything. I mean, Bill Gates doesn't need to give you a fake vaccine with a chip in it to track you. you're already doing it voluntarily, right? So
there you go. There you go. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Lines, the only podcast purifying the sports betting industry. Remember to like, download, subscribe, follow us on all the socials at InPlayLive. I'm your host, Shane Mercer. That guy over there, Andrew Pace, joining me as always. He's the founder of InPlayLive, a community of like-minded sports bettors dedicated to long-term success. And today, fresh off his appearance before the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, we have the executive chairman of Prime Sports and a member of the Sports Betting Hall of Fame, Joe Brennan. Joe, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
I mean, with a wind up like that, thank you. I mean, I'm honored and humbled.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here because as I was saying just before we got started here, I watched the entire Massachusetts Gaming Commission meeting from last week, and we're going to really dive into that. And it's just fantastic to have you here. I thought you did a fantastic job representing sports bettors at that meeting, and it was just incredible. But how do you feel leaving the meeting last week? I'm sure you received a lot of messages of support and that kind of thing.
I was like a lot of people, of course. It was really nice, some of the stuff that people said or they wrote on social and everything like that. And I spent about half the day depressed. And the reason is because like back when I used to regularly do those things like committee meetings and hearings and those kind of things, pre-COVID, those were always in person, you know, jacket, tie, you're in some government office or meeting room somewhere. This is the first time I did one virtual. And the reason why it made a difference was it kind of turned into open mic night, at least our half of the session, and that the Chairman Maynard, gavelled the session. He said, like, oh, we're here to talk about the other side, alternate forms of sports betting, and then responsible gaming and some other issues. And he said, but so why don't I just open the mic up here and you guys just jump in? And I'm like, what? You're used to somebody like very formally saying to you, like, well, Mr. Brennan, you know, and then pointing a question at you that it's more of a statement rather than a question, and you get to bat it back. I'm sure you guys have seen this either like in real life or in the movies and television. But what was difficult about that is, and like I always say this, I said it at the time, responsible gaming is an incredibly important issue. I don't pay lip service to that. But to have immediately a session that was dedicated towards talking about player limiting, and the responsible gaming people came in on a secondary topic and basically took off, and they started the second session, I thought was problematic. So I was like, oh God, I can't believe I got to knock over the nice ladies who are here to talk about problem gambling. This is essentially what I did.
And they are very nice ladies.
Them over. And they are, yeah. I mean, again, very important work that they do. And like they showed up at Bet Bash, they show up at all these conferences. They're like the, you know, Daniel and the Lion's Den when they had to go to those things. Me, I got everybody pat me on the back. They come in and like, oh, it's the gambling is bad ladies, right?
Yeah, the fun police.
It's tough for them. Yeah, it's tough for them to be there. But in that kind of situation, I just kind of felt a little off kilter. So I think I need a few more preseason reps before I get out there. But yeah, it was interesting to be back in the political and regulatory.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna dive into some of the meeting and really sort of eat up some of the meat and potatoes from it. But before we get to that, Pace, last week you were on. You had a little bit of a story about Bet99, and I think you have an update on it before we sort of get into the meeting. Can you share the update?
Yeah, so we were talking about how they're sending out that responsible gaming notice to their players. So I had played on their site for, I think it was 26 hours straight that weekend, and I only got information when I was down, but the wagers were pending. I was never actually down. I got a notification, I think it's important to say, this past weekend, one time where I was up. But what I realized was the volume and frequency of the notification that they send out is strictly based on when you've just placed bets or if you are down, so that you get these big red scary numbers saying that you're down constantly. And I hit a point with that account where I was like, okay, you guys saw my balances on the show last week. So I got it up around 23,000, and they sent out a notice. I think I put 3 of that 23 into play, and I sent out a notice, you're down 3,000 again. And I said it on the stream. I went, Bet99 reality check. I'm like, you guys need a reality check. Like, how are you guys doing with my account if you keep telling me that I'm down? But anyway, so there's 2 things I wanted to bring up. Number 1, they did finally send one out where I was up. But number 2, they specifically correlate when they go out with pending wagers to try to, I guess, scare you, maybe put you on tilt a little bit, in order to, I don't know, make you look like you're down, I guess, potentially creating some sort of tilt opportunity for the player. So I do not believe that to be a responsible gaming tool.
Wow. It definitely
anything like that at Prime, Joe?
No. First of all, updating in real time, hell no. We're a little more wind up than that. But no, I kind of wonder that, there's a thing like regulators, like in the different jurisdictions, they all treat when you stake a wager differently. Like, New Jersey's a great example of, like, as soon as you stake a wager, that's considered revenue on our part. Like, well, we haven't even graded the bet yet. But, if you make a $10,000 wager with Prime that day, and maybe it's for a game that doesn't settle until the following day, or it's a futures bet or something, that's revenue as far as New Jersey's concerned. And they're like, hey, send us the taxes on that. Yeah. But so I wonder if that might, not to stick up for Bet99. I've never been on their site. I've met a couple of the people, but I've never been on the site. But I wonder if that maybe kind of plays in, because you're in Vancouver, right? Where you're making that. Okay, so that wouldn't hold, because I know they're in Ontario, which even I, as an American, know. Vancouver here, Ontario here. So it wouldn't be that. So I don't know. That's pretty crazy sounding. But who knows? Maybe they've got some, like a behavioral economist that's on the staff there, and they've figured out, like, the best way to squeeze the money out of you is to keep you in a constant state of, red font panic or something.
Well, I mean, that is a tactic across the industry. It's just, I think it was used differently with them, and I was surprised to see over the course of, a couple of weeks where they keep telling me I'm down when I'm not. That was really the surprise. So we brought that up in our episode last week. And then I feel like, to be credible, I have to say that they did in fact tell me I was up in one of the notifications.
Yeah, one. Well, I mean, one out of how many?
Oh gosh, dozens and dozens. Yeah.
Like
every few minutes they're popping up.
I mean, again, I don't know them that well or anything like that, but if you can't do the simple work of letting a player know what his current balance is, why are you in this business? I mean, that just seems like it would undermine credibility pretty substantially. I'm probably walking into that one right now. Probably somebody saying, like, well, my Prime balance isn't up to date right now. So,
oh God.
Okay. Well, thanks for the update there, and I'm glad Joe brought up a behavioral analyst potentially being involved, because it sounds like if you were at the MGC, or you were listening to the MGC, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, last week, the softbook operators make it sound like it is all about behavior. So why don't we just dive into this? And guys, bear with me while I go on a little bit of maybe a soliloquy here, but I want to bring our audience really up to speed. I know many of you out there listening and watching from around the world may have actually tuned in to the Massachusetts Gaming Commission Council meeting last week. But for those of you out there who didn't, I just want to sort of bring you up to speed a little bit on what transpired, and sort of, give you at least the operator's point of view. So they participated in this meeting. This is something we've been covering very closely here on the show over the last several months. There was a meeting that was supposed to take place. They all skipped out on it. The commissioners were quite upset about the whole thing, and they finally got them to come to the table, and it took place last week. All right. So the meeting was divided into two parts. In the first part, we heard from BetMGM, FanDuel, Fanatics, DraftKings, and Caesars. And I think there was someone there from Penn Entertainment who didn't say a word the entire time. But the others did speak. And I'll say this about the operators. They did a great job of speaking with one collective voice. The talking points, I don't know if they coordinated ahead of time, but all of their talking points were basically exactly the same, and they were all singing from the same hymn book here. Now, unfortunately, I felt like that voice disparaged winning sports bettors. They basically said there's a tiny fraction of customers, less than 1%, who belong to nefarious associations. They're involved in syndicate betting. They deploy bots. They courtside. They abuse bonuses. And they basically accused winning bettors of finding a way to cheat, dubbing them advantage players, a term that was thrown around throughout the entire portion of their side of the meeting. They all said they don't limit customers because they win. Instead, they say they limit customers based on betting behavior, which they essentially characterized as bad behavior. All right, Joe, what do you think? Was this an accurate synopsis of what the operators told the MGC? Am I on point here?
100% on point. I think I tweeted out pretty early on two things that I just thought was so clever. That I thought it was going to be a really long meeting if you're just going to have the same people read, compliance and lawyers read off the same public statement. Since it seems pretty obvious by the result that they colluded before the meeting to make sure that they all had the same talking points. I don't think that 6 disparate parties just suddenly decided that like advantage player was going to be the pejorative of the day. Yeah. And then just this use of advantage player. It's a nice way of avoiding saying winning player, right? But it certainly seemed like at the time, like if you wanted to have a drinking game while you were watching that meeting, taking a pop every time somebody said advantage player. And it wasn't just that they said advantage player. It was the way they said it, right? They just put all sorts of stank on it. Advantage player, Look, and I think I was one of the points I wanted to make, and I said it directly when I got up to bat in the second half of that thing is advantage player is just another way of saying good player. And what they object to is that players that may know more than they do. And we'll readily admit, I will, Adam Bjorn will, our head of bookmaking. There are players out there that have better models. They have better intelligence. They're better they have better information about these markets than we do. So if you have somebody who has better information, better model, when you want their information, well, short of, hiring them, which none of these guys want to come to work for us or they already would have. What's the only other way that you can get their information? Well, it's by taking their bets. And instead of worrying about like that guy wants to make a $2,000, $3,000 bet on a given market, whether he's sharp or not, use that guy's information to, influence how you offer the market to the next 100 people who are coming in behind him. But I think you kind of hit it. They're all going to sing from the same song sheet. They're going to try and characterize this that it's just, it's like less than 1%, which I think kind of undermines the financial risk that they put themselves at. Well, if it's less than 1% of the players that are out there, don't you think your billions of dollars of public markets money gives you sufficient cushion to be able to handle that action?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is they like to portray it as, like the Spankies and the Billy Walters are like the Carl Icahns of the world, making a public markets analogy. Like they're just these nefarious, corporate raiders with, all this money, and they're just trying to gut us. And what they don't want to do is they want to talk about the guy who's like betting a couple $100, who's strung together 4 or 5 wins. The next thing he knows, he's betting $2 limits because he's shown that he has closing line value. That he's, when the Fanatics government relations guy, and you could tell he's a government relations guy because he didn't know anything about marketing and he didn't know anything about bookmaking, but kind of gleefully said, oh, well, over 50% of the players that we limit aren't even winners. They're net losers. It's just that they show tendencies that they might win sometimes. Like, what a money shot. Holy smokes.
Yeah, it was pretty clear there. I was thinking, wait a minute, huh? Yeah, sure, buddy. 50%. But I will say this: when they threw around the 1% number, I didn't believe them, but it made me feel good. I started thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, only 1%.
Because you're a 1%er?
Yeah, I'm an elite sports bettor here.
Shane, it's only 1 out of 100,
right,
man.
Yeah, exactly.
It's only 1 out of 100.
That's it. Yeah. Anyway, Joe, I think you did a fantastic job explaining the difference and really sort of schooling the commissioners on the sharp book model and the soft book model. And it almost seemed like the commissioners didn't really understand that there was a sharp book model, that something other than the soft book model even existed. Did you get that sense? And were you surprised by that? I found through their line of questioning that they asked you repeatedly, you don't limit winners? It's just like,
oh yeah, when Chairman Maynard just threw a meatball at me.
Yeah.
He's like, Joe, under what circumstances would Prime limit a bettor? And when I said, well, we wouldn't. I mean, God, that like set Twitter ablaze. I should have that printed on coffee mugs and T-shirts.
Oh, absolutely.
Number of people were like, you paid him to do that. I'm like, I wish I had. I feel less guilty about it. But look, the truth is they are going to have to go through a sort of education process because there's not currently any regulated sports books in Massachusetts that are open sports books or sharp sports books. We're not there. Circa's not there. The only ones that would be there are the ones that are gray market operators, and they're not going to show up to that meeting. And I don't think that the Massachusetts regulators are going to spend too much time on it, but they ought to consider it at least, setting aside whether Circa or Prime enter that market. I mean, we're interested in it. This has very high upfront sunk costs to enter that market for a smaller company. But for the Massachusetts regulators to consider, well, if sharp players in Massachusetts can't bet with FanDuel, DraftKings, whatever, where are they betting? And most likely they're betting with gray market operators, or they're betting on the street. People are going to take their action there. So, and that means that there's the market is operating suboptimally, and from a consumer protection perspective, dangerously, one could say. So, I'll give the Massachusetts regulators credit for this is that they're the first regulatory body here to really publicly dive into this one. I don't think that they'll be the last, but I also don't think that there's going to be lightning quick change in the market regarding this issue.
Joe, do you think that the whole way of like the Massachusetts thing being like online and public and all that kind of stuff, do you think that's positive for the industry as a whole from the standpoint of other regulators having like real-time access to it? Or do you think that that really doesn't matter? Because what I was thinking when they no-showed was, this is the previous meeting, when they all no-showed. Yeah. What I was thinking is, well, why the hell would they show when this would all be public and then the states could fall like dominoes? Like, what are your thoughts?
I when that happened, and I got tipped the day before, said they're not going to show. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, of course they're going to show. Just because in the gaming industry here in the US, like the regulators, they're a really powerful force. So when they didn't show, that was such disrespect. I've never seen that in 25 years of being around this industry, seeing somebody so publicly show up their regulator. Whoever thought that was a good idea, I think it backfired on them because it just put an exclamation point on what we're talking about here. As far as do I think it's going to affect regulators in other states? Well, yeah, probably. But what I think it affects more is bettors in other states, because what they may start to do is coalesce around this in other markets and say to their regulators, why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you doing this in New Jersey or Ohio or Nevada or other states? because obviously this is a practice that's not limited to Massachusetts. The Massachusetts regulators, mass gaming, has just been incredibly aggressive in looking at a lot of issues, everything from the advertising, bonusing, language, limiting, things like that. And what's interesting is they're a relatively new gaming state. They've had casino gambling in the state for less than 10 years. So, and then obviously sports betting just in the last couple of years. So to see them being a relatively new regulator and being as curious about this and publicly curious about it, I think is just a good.
Based on what you heard during the meeting, and I'm sort of torn here. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. But do you think the MGC is interested at all in long-term sustainability for professional sports bettors, or do you think that their that their main objective is to help out those recreational sports bettors that maybe get caught up in the limiting by the soft books?
I don't think it's one or the other. When you're a regulator, you're a shepherd, okay, and they're working both sides for the operators, for the players, the consumers, and then also, they're in the middle. They got into this business because they're collecting taxes on it, so they have interest in this as well. But they're essentially shepherds. I don't think that they start off one way or the other. I don't. They clearly, I would say, as a practice, generally, they don't have in their charter. All right, we represent the interests of the operators, or we represent the interests of the consumers. I think it's more of we represent the marketplace. We're the referee. We're the good shepherd. We have to be, monkey in the middle on these things and make sure that this market runs optimally from a legal and then we'll say economic performance perspective.
Yeah. You kind of I got that sense from a few of them. There's another aspect to the meeting that I want to dive into, and I really want to sort of get your perspective on it. And it's the conversation around data. So I want to actually play a clip here from the meeting, and this is Commissioner Eileen O'Brien. And I'll just play it. It's very short, but we'll just give it a spin here.
Hills, thank you to all coming in. I know sometimes these are uncomfortable conversations. I think they're necessary, though. You're talking about perceptions, right, being, inaccurate. And I certainly, and all of us, want to have the information if that's the case. And I think one of the ways to do that also is the data and the stats that you have. So in terms of your conversations with staff, I would like a huge part of that to be them peeling back the layer, right? To be able to say, all right, this may be the problem area that we need to hone in on, or there is no problem area at the end of the day, right? But I do think those stats are going to help staff then advise us on this as well. So I think that staff conversation with you guys has to include some of those specifics.
All right. So, Joe, help me out here. Exactly what kind of data do you think the MGC needs to better inform their decisions, and do you think they'll actually get it?
I would say optimally they're getting their performance data down to the player transactional level to be able to demonstrate these patterns, these behaviors that are apparently red flags for the different operators that's causing them to flag people and limit them. So to be able to see that for themselves. And that's, I can say that in at least both the jurisdictions that we're currently operating in right now, New Jersey and in Ohio, we have to give a transactional feed to the state that they can, for audit purposes, so they can see like who's betting what and what have you. I think where Commissioner O'Brien, and as a side note about Commissioner O'Brien, if you've been watching these MGC hearings that they've had, like Commissioner O'Brien throws chin heat all the time.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan.
A big fan. Yeah, yeah. I was singing her praises in our Discord group, Jared. Again, I mean, she's straight fire. Love her.
Man, she's tough. But I think for Commissioner O'Brien, I'm going to guess at what maybe her thought process is. And it kind of feeds into this. They also brought up the issue of notification of players as to why they limit. And that is for audit purposes. Like, okay, well, you're saying you detect these behaviors. Draw me the data map here. Take me through ABC based on the data. What you saw here that you reached this conclusion and you're reaching these conclusions. And are there, conversely, if there's something that truly is an issue that's allowing bettors to game the system, like court siding got mentioned, how many different times? So all right, well, show us the data that shows, all right, how many players are being able to get down ahead of the feeds, because the feed speed was also something that's been brought up. We have issues with it. Here's the thing. I don't want anybody to think that I just came in here today so I could jump up and down on Fan King's head and say what an imperfect vessel they are for our industry. Okay. Look, last night we had problems with feeds. They use the same settlement feeds that we have. And these happen to be the official data feeds for NFL and other things. And there's going to be problems. Every day there are problems. Every day you got to kind of get in there and manually adjust things that were settled the wrong way because the NFL's official data feed or somebody's official data feed was incorrect on something. So I don't want to say that there's perfection out there and these guys are just screwing it up. But is there the level of nefariousness that's going on, either with people having faster trading feeds than we have and the other bookmakers have, the court siding piece? So let's take a look at that. Some of the more nuanced stuff, like, oh, well, the player always seems to be coming down, on the right side of the line close and things like that. Some of that's going to be really tough to kind of make the case for, particularly if you have an operator like a Fanatics that they're just saying well, it looks like they might have CLV in their favor the majority of times, but we can't tell. And even though we're a losing player, we're not going to wait around and see if this player is going to be good. So some of it's a bit more nuanced. In order to do this I'd say in a proactive way for the regulators, that's going to require an awful lot of third-party analysis of the transactional data that we turn over on every wager that's made that are date time stamped. And you got to compare it to the events data. So it's not a small endeavor that Commissioner O'Brien is suggesting. Is it one that we should be able to do given the computing power and all the data that is available and all the stuff that we already have to turn over to regulators? Yeah. Is it one that I would today want to start getting into? And we don't have anything to hide as far as limiting players because we don't do it. But the thought of turning over data, getting involved in that kind of ongoing near real time auditing of transactions so we could justify certain events that we might have. That would be difficult. It would be difficult. Not impossible, but would be difficult.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious to see if they actually do it, and what they end up turning over, and then how much of that actually gets shared publicly. Which it could be all of it. It could be none of it. Who knows? I want to play one more clip here. This one comes from Richard Schuetz. I'm probably pronouncing it incorrect. Richard Schutz from the American Bettors Voices. And here's a guy of significant experience who I think also did a fantastic job at representing sports bettors at the meeting. It takes him a little bit to get to a point, but it ends up being a pretty sharp point. So I won't play a super long clip from him, but here's Richard giving the commissioners a little piece of advice.
Never seen anything quite like what is going now, and that is the tail is wagging the dog. You people are regulators. You have the ability to request information in clear, succinct steps and have them provide it to you and have the ability to audit that. And I think that's where, as long as you keep talking about that, you're going to continue to be going around in circles going, what did he say? And I absolutely believe you need to just take charge.
All right. So basically telling them that, hey, right now, the operators are the ones in control here, and you guys got to take charge. Do you think that's an accurate portrayal?
I gotta say that when Richard was saying this in real time, I was like, wow, maybe take a little heat off that pitch there, dude. Especially like you people, like, whoa. He is correct in that. Look, I started off by saying these guys, the regulators are shepherds. They are. It's their markets. Now, the level of engagement that they would have to have, and the level of resources that they would have to be able to sift through this data credibly and effectively in a near real-time basis in their markets, it would be a step up from how they're currently resourced. Nobody has that level of resourcing. Not Nevada, not New Jersey, not any of the newer states. So while I agree that, I think what Richard was trying to get at is pretty disrespectful the way the operators came in the first time around and just blew off the regulators. That's something that cannot be allowed. And they have to, Massachusetts regulators and regulators in other states, they have to make sure that genie doesn't get out of the bottle, which is you have these newer companies, either new to the U.S. or just new to the industry itself, and they're populated by a bunch of people who don't have any experience, and they come out and they treat the regulators just like they treat, I don't know, the Better Business Bureau or some other, annoying government agency that they see as a speed bump. Regulators have to assert that this is a highly scrutinized market, that they have. It's a privilege, not a right, to operate in these markets. And, I guess the best way of saying it, like that old Seinfeld thing, who's got hand in this market? It's the regulators, right? But I think also at the same time, Richard is saying something that while he's right in the abstract, he's not right in the here and now, the practical, and saying, like, you guys should be taking this data and you guys should be policing it. You guys should be. Hold on there, Richard. Like, okay, how much more money do they have to get from their respective states in order to be able to tool up, be able to do that kind of. Now, maybe it's just the threat of doing something like that, because Richard, he's an old gun. That guy's been around for a long, long time, right? So maybe it's just the threat of potentially doing something like that is the hope that everybody falls in the line. But unfortunately, I think things have progressed too far with this market, and you already see, a number of the operators, when it comes to like how they're reporting their revenue and things like that, you're starting to see a lot of fines and infractions that are accruing here. It seems like every month somebody's getting in trouble with the state of New Jersey for their non-reporting. Who knows? Maybe next month it's Prime Sports. But you see these things; they happen, and it seems willful. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think mere threats or suggestions of threats are going to be effective. But at the same time, it's asking the regulators to step up to a level that they have not been in. And there's third parties that are looking at our data. Like, you guys are probably familiar with the name U.S. Integrity, which is a third-party company that we're supposed to be sharing our data on our markets with, and they're primarily looking at it from an integrity position. Like, they're supposed to be detecting the next Jonte Porter issue, right? Or at least being the guys who go back and autopsy the data to determine whether one happened. Mm-hmm. So are we now looking at there needs to be a third party that is looking at data even more proactively and near real time, more intensely, for things instead of integrity issues regarding the contest? We'll say integrity issues regarding the players and the operators. And right now, nobody has that.
You know what's interesting though is like obviously through the lens of In Play Live, we get to see all these sports bettors across North America, some of them in Europe as well, where in real time, we'll potentially see the same sports book settle a wager differently based on the location. So a really good example was Bet365 was in New Jersey and Colorado, and obviously in Ontario. And they voided the wagers in Ontario. They settled them as winners in New Jersey and Colorado. Right. Obviously, you talked about fines coming out. Bet365 was obviously just recently fined in New Jersey. But then going back to the whole data discussion, like we know firsthand, I love how you call it fan kings, by the way. We know firsthand that, and again, this is going to be like, someone's playing a fiddle in the corner, like who cares, or the tiny violin, but like, as really successful bettors, sometimes, no one's going to necessarily care or side with you to the extent of like, I don't know. We had a story of a guy who made 11 $1 wagers on Bet365 and the definition of responsible betting and his account got clipped. So we'll see. Oh yeah. He was on our podcast.
One of the biggest goddamn companies in the world.
He was like one of our first guests too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pathetic. Sorry.
Oh, it's and that's not isolated, unfortunately. But the reason why I bring it up is because Fan King, sure, but Bet365, I think they're one of one in the scumbag category. They're obviously operating in Massachusetts as well. Didn't show up to the thing, but they're if you had their data, they're doing everything from like I can't remember exactly what this is called, but it's a pattern of the way you move and interact with the app that's detected through their software to try to determine who you are as a player outside of your username. Fair, I guess. But location, right? So like the sales pitch of sports betting, you have these DraftKings bars or these Barstool Sports bars. I know Barstool Sports isn't a sports book anymore. You have these kiosks where everyone gathers together in the same place to bet, whether that's a sports book in Vegas or whatever it is. You're jumping on the MGM Grand's Wi-Fi collectively, as a group of people in that place. As an innocent sports bettor who's going to wager on games, that is like instinctual. You go into a place, what's the Wi-Fi, right? You go into a place where you're in the same location as someone else and you're being geolocated right down to the very pin that you're sitting on for where you're playing from. So they're using those types of tools separately of the wagers themselves. But from an innocent player's standpoint, then winning a few bets and then having that used against you is like complete and utter bullshit. And that's where I go, what would the data say about those things that would be eye-opening to the regulator, especially from, I think the Fan Kings thing, I know DraftKings is doing that specifically, but especially from Bet365. They're doing that all over the world and in a whole series of different ways where they are limiting players with these $1 wagers. So that's where I think the data would be like just damning to open up someone's account and see like, you did what to this player that's betting $1 per whatever? Like, how could you possibly do that? So yeah, I mean, the data side of it, while you're saying is expensive, I'm like, geez, like if they demanded that from a couple of these providers, it would be shocking, some of the stuff that we might end up seeing.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and it's sad in that none of what you just said is news to me. Okay. Because that's more or less, it's not even just the gaming industry. I mean, consumer web, the amount of money or the amount of data that people give up about themselves every day when they pick up this thing, right? Yeah. And they do everything. I mean, Bill Gates doesn't need to give you a fake vaccine with a chip in it to track you. you're already doing it voluntarily, right? So
there you go.
Everybody just breezes past like the terms and conditions thing. I just check that box. I got to get on. I got to be able to use Venmo. I got to be able to use Amazon. I got to be able to use Prime Sports. I got to Fan Kings, whatever. Everybody just blows past that. They never read it, and people are. This is the sad thing about everything that you just said is that everybody's agreed to it. we've all agreed to it to some extent or another, to let these companies track us like that. Okay. Now, nobody ever thinks about that, like, oh, the level, like, oh, well, we'll do tracking data. I'm just thinking like, oh, well, that they're going to put cookies on there. So like, when I do a Google search on cookies and then I go to, I don't know, inplaylive.com, I'm going to get like banner ads that are going to say like, hey, have you had a chocolate chip today? Like that, because people are always behind of what they think the capabilities are. But then when you're talking about everything from like the digital fingerprinting to on, device behavior analysis, everything that you just talked about. And I mean, I like to say to people, I'm like web 0.1. I first started in 92 with Prodigy. And then, I came through AOL and AOL Time Warner and all the stuff that we were doing then. That would be considered like if most of the public knew about it today. They'd be like, wow, God, that's so advanced. Like that was 20 years ago. Stuff that's being done now is just amazing. The way that you're able to get psychographic information about consumers based on their behavior on their apps. Not at Prime Sports. No. We just know what you're betting on and whether you're a good bettor or not. That's it. But I agree with you. It's if they suddenly had to expose that to regulators, they'd shit themselves. Let's just say it as it is. But of course, they would make sure in any kind of data handover that the request would be so narrowly tailored that the regulators would never get it. So does that then beg the question, well, should regulators be going deeper on, well, what kind of data are you collecting from players here, right? Yeah, I mean, regulators don't often go on fishing trips. They could. Regulators have broad discretion. A gaming regulator in the United States has more discretion than a U.S. attorney or the attorney general. There's no necessarily due process or anything like that. So they could, if they wanted to, they could. They just normally don't. They have to have a good reason to do
right.
things. And I don't think that this issue would necessarily affect. Now, I do think the responsible gaming one is an issue that could potentially trigger those kind of expeditions by regulators. Like, well, what are you collecting on people? Which might be potentially more dangerous to them, at least from a public perception, than this limiting of winners. Sorry, advantage players, or whatever it is that we're calling. Right. Drink. So.
Well, I guess we better talk about Prime Sports, hey Joe, because the reason why I think it's awesome that you attended that Massachusetts thing, but obviously this stems way beyond Massachusetts. So like, where do you see Prime Sports fitting into all of this? Not just relating to one state, but across the state and like into the future, because, obviously as a player who's been clipped at, at least 500 sports books, it's always nice to hear someone that has a bit of a vision in the industry that is treating this terrible advantage player with respect.
Drink. I get, if I had to say like what our strategy is, what we see the opportunity. Adam Bjorn probably says it best, is that for every dollar that is being wagered in the regulated markets here in the US right now, at least one, maybe two more that are continue to be wagered in the unregulated. That might be offshore.
Is that accurate?
Street. Well, it's the offshore industry. I mean, they're not exactly reporting their numbers.
Yeah,
sure.
But we do have a good idea. You do have a good sense of like what the companies in Costa Rica and elsewhere are doing. If you even with looking at like the paperhead shops, even though they're not doing direct transact, when you look at the size and scale of some of those companies, they're not. People aren't using those just so they can take nickel wagers out there on the streets. So, and the other thing is, think about how it's funny I hear this a lot, which is when guys start to, they come in, the great thing about Fan Kings is they created a lot of new bettors in a sense, and that a lot of guys who weren't doing it before were giving it a try. And now they've gotten to a certain level, and a certain percentage of that cohort is now saying like, well, I want to give real betting a try. Well, real betting isn't necessarily Fan Kings in their mind. It is betting offshore. It's betting with a bookie. It's, it's betting using crypto, things like that. So it's funny how this is kind of this weird, inversion for a lot of people in this industry who want to move, because it's no secret when you look online when you look at betting Twitter and things like that, and you go in the forums and you see people talking, forums. That's such a fucking old school thing, isn't it? Like, go on the forums. Yeah,
They're still out there.
Like,
They're still out there.
When you go on like Discord, right? And you're like Discord. Yeah. Such an old guy tell, wasn't it? Jesus. Yeah, we're all still on SBR forum, Joe.
Yeah. SBR. Yeah. Good times.
But when people talk, and it's no secret that, look, if you want to be a successful pro right now, given the state of the game here in the United States, you have to, it's more or less a necessity to look beyond the regulated market, which is kind of ridiculous when you think of it. So
it is ridiculous.
So our goal isn't to come in and necessarily target guys who are going to Fan Kings or going to the casino or going to the sports adjacent like Fanatics or ESPN. Because those guys are all on one side of the pool. They're all after like the $20 recreational bettor who wants to bet parlays. And there's millions of those. We're more in the deeper end of the pool from in terms of liquidity, but not necessarily the number of players. So we're talking about cohort that's probably 1,000. Okay, but they are players who have either they've been chased away or they've never been welcomed into this marketplace, this U.S. regulated marketplace. So they continue to play offshore. And what we want to be able to do is offer the regulated markets version of it. It's as simple as that. Instead of having to send your money, via Dogecoin to some outfit down in the islands, right? You can send it to us in New Jersey and Ohio, and then soon Kentucky and Arizona, and you can play and get paid out in good old fashioned U.S. greenbacks instead of, I don't know, whatever shit coin some of these guys are doling out there right now. And that has an upside to it. There's people who respond to it. So that's really where we're going. We'd like to try and be one more out for players who are continuing to do that, and see if we can slowly move. Well, it doesn't have to be slowly. If it could be rapid, Mrs. Brennan would be really happy about that. But see if we can start to eat into the amount of money that's going in unregulated markets and regulated.
Right.
But there's only three companies arguably that are kind of doing it. Two traditional sports bakers in Prime and Circa out on the West Coast. And then because, they're an exchange, essentially, it's Sport Trade in New Jersey and now in a couple other states. So that three against how many in how many states? So we're definitely having a slower start, but every dollar, let's put it this way. We don't pay to acquire players. Every dollar that's bet with us comes to us organically. And people know who and what we are. Our thing is that we gotta kind of grow beyond the guys who are just the sharps and the offshore players, and try and get into more of the collective, more recreational market. But we have to give them something that appeals to them.
Well, Joe, you did also just say like you're giving them the legal out as opposed to the offshore out, but those offshore, they still are going to clip your accounts, right? Like it isn't like those accounts aren't getting looked at. It's just sometimes the leash can be a little bit better. So you still are you can keep playing on your site. You're not limiting winning players, right? So that's something I know we've touched on, but I mean, is amazing. And I think the broader picture there is going back to the regulation, is that you represent to those regulators and to those other all sports books, like, hey guys, all those things you're saying you can't do, that's our model. So not only can you do it, it's how we operate.
Yeah. First of all, let me start off by saying, like, getting a Canadian to say the word out 3 times in one sentence was really like a highlight.
I went to Bet Bash.
Out, like, oh,
They taught me how to do it there.
No, do to boot it. So that was definitely a highlight there. No, I mean, the thing is the irony is the irony wasn't lost on me in that if I was a Massachusetts regulator during that panel last week, the question I would have asked me is like, well, then why aren't you in Massachusetts, right? Like, if your model is so obvious and has its virtues, well, why aren't you here, right? And that always begs the question. It's like, well, you guys make it really expensive and upfront sunk costs to enter your marketplace. So that's one of the reasons why we're not there. And at the same time, the regulators, if they wanted to say, well, look, okay, yeah, the guys who are currently here, they limit, but there's other companies out there that don't limit, then really it's up to the marketplace to say, if Massachusetts is a good enough market and has enough winners, then one of these companies, Circa, Prime, whomever, will find their way into our marketplace and problem solved, right? Because they don't think about it kind of the same way that we do. There doesn't need to be 4 or 5 open sports books up there to counter the recreational sports books. If there was one, it'd be like, okay, problem solved. So yeah. I get it. I even had a couple of people say to me, like, why are you up there like championing, like saying like you guys should force those guys to not limit players? That wouldn't that cut into the rationale for you? And the answer is yeah, it is. But I mean, are we going to? Would it really? No, not really, because you look at the heyday when sports betting in the early 2000s through the aughts. You had plenty of sports books. You had the Greek, Pinnacle, Heritage, Betcris, all those. They all got freaking enormous, and there wasn't anything standing in their way. There was plenty to go around. It's this zero sum game approach, or that they have to this marketplace, that I think is also a limiting factor. But again, this is, as you said at the outset, there's a lot of education that's involved here, and especially some of the newer states. They did this very quickly. I'm not saying that Massachusetts doesn't know what they're doing, but all of these states that went after New Jersey, we worked for 10 years to get to this point. So New Jersey was pretty well educated on the ins and outs, the funnel, and the economics on sports betting, which is probably why they're still the top jurisdiction when you look. They punch way above. So many of the others, though, it was like, okay, well, the state was passing legislation to enable sports betting late in their spring session, because that's when states pass their state budget. It was always being sold by people who are lobbying on the behalf of legal sports betting, like, hey, there's a lot of tax dollars to be made. So it was getting done late, but then everybody was saying, like, we got to get live by NFL season. So sometimes you had like a few months. I think in Arizona, it was like 2 or 3 months when they did it, to go from we're passing a law to we're licensing everybody and flipping the switch and having a legal market. So there's not a whole lot of time to sit down and do the library work on the industry to know, hey, this is what's best. So you probably need to have a kind of refresher course for everybody in the U.S. regulated industry to say, like, look, this is why this was a great opportunity in the first place. We didn't make our estimates about the economics of the U.S. sports betting market if it were legalized. We didn't do it based on guys who weren't even old enough to, like, gosh, I don't know, ride a bike at the time, which is all the 20-something guys who are now doing SGPs. the numbers, the estimates were being done based on guys who were betting on the street, betting offshore, all of this. And the irony is like, okay, now all those guys can't get onshore. They're being turned away. So there really has to be kind of like a go back, refresher course on education on this is how the industry functions. These are the real economics. This is why you can't charge 51% gross gaming tax rate and expect it to be a healthy market that's going to continue to operate. A number of questions, but nobody's really stepping forward right now because things are moving too fast, too furious, and all the companies have their attention based elsewhere.
Because you are such a proponent of the legalization effort, especially in New Jersey, I'm curious as to what your thoughts might be on some of the markets that haven't fallen yet, California, Texas. Do we think, or at least do you think, from your vantage point, that they're going to give in eventually? Because we got a lot of people in our community in those states that are using the offshores, and I'm sure they would love to see some of those regulated soft books come in so they could take advantage of them for a day or a week if they're lucky.
well, what's the timeline? What's the timeline available for eventually? I'll use for example. So I started with the lobbying effort in New Jersey around sports betting in November of 2008.
10 years prior.
The year before me in California, the lobbying effort started to legalize online poker in California. Is there any online poker that's legal in California right now? So the tribes in California, the gaming tribes, they're tough as nails. They don't look at the issue the same way that we do, in that, like, obviously we're real big advocates of sports betting and online sports betting in particular, right? They look at that from a very different angle. That is just one more piece of the gaming pie, and by their estimation, not a particularly big one. Imagine how much money that they have that right now they look at Fan Kings and they're like, right? And when it came to mounting a campaign against Fan Kings and all that, like, what, Fan Kings spent like $200 million in California to get it on the ballot. The tribe spent $300 million. They probably didn't have to spend anywhere near as much, because how much money they pay to the state as part of the gaming compact and all the relationships that they've paid for handsomely over the years in Sacramento and everything. They didn't have to spend anywhere near that much, but they spent it probably in part to show the Fan Kings guys, this is our territory. This is our state. And we're going to decide when this is going to happen. Okay. So it's not going to happen until the tribes want it to happen. The general, Victor, I'm forgetting Victor's, I'm blanking on his last name. He's the gentleman who is the head of the National Indian Gaming Association. A couple of weeks ago, he put up on Twitter, it was like sports betting and then less than sign buffet. I was like, jeez, Victor, there was a nicer way to say that, right? But it's like right now our buffets, all you can eat buffets in our casinos would make us more money than sports betting does. So, and it's that economic piece, a real sense of what the economics are, is one of the reasons why it's not going anywhere in Texas. The Texas lieutenant governor said a couple of years ago, the amount of money that we would be projected to get from taxing legal sports betting in the state of Texas wouldn't last us half of one day of our state budget. So why would we do it? And when you stand up against that, and there's a lot of cultural resistance because the evangelical community there in Texas, and the fact that everybody in Texas goes over the border to Oklahoma to the tribal casinos there to get their gamble on, right? There's a lot of things that are working against any kind of near-term solution in those states. which must be why everybody's going into sweepstakes, right? To come up with a solution that's, I don't know. We won't go too far into sweepstakes here right now, but it's not exactly an easy road forward there as well.
Wow, fascinating to sort of hear that kind of analysis of the current landscape in those states. Joe, is there any other message you want to share with our audience about what Prime's doing, about where you guys are going? A lot of our audience is in Canada. I don't know if our market is of interest or if you're just focusing on the U.S. market at this point. But any sort of final message you want to share with our audience?
First of all, I got nothing against Canadians based on some of the prior statements I've made. The CEO works for me. The CEO works for me. He's a proud Vancouverite, so, but somehow also a Dallas Cowboys fan, so go figure. Canada obviously is interesting. That's a market. I certainly thought their approach was very interesting with when they first legalized in Ontario, where gray market operators like Pinnacle and 365 could apply for licensure, in addition to all of the pure regulated market types like Fan Kings could come in as well. So definitely a unique approach. I would say kind of a common sense approach if what your goal is as a state or a territory and maximizing immediate growth of a regulated marketplace, consumer protection and maximizing tax revenue. It's a pretty sensible way of doing things. I don't think it would necessarily fly in the U.S., but there's too much working against it, too much legal history working against it. But it was interesting to see. We take a walk, don't run to our death type approach here right now, and I think it's benefited us.
That makes sense.
I frequently joke about my sportsbook.com Deadpool. And like, okay, well, what's the next company we're going to scratch off here? There's been a lot of folks who've, the Unibets, the Betfreds, and people like that have stepped up to take the bullet to get scratched off my list. Who knows? Maybe Prime would be a good one to bet on right now. Because, we're certainly not picking the easy way to go here in the markets. We are, though, expanding. We're waiting for Kentucky regulators to approve our license so that we can open up there. There are rumors, and I know you guys heard them when we were at Bet Bash, about something going on down there in Arizona, and we hope to have more definitive announcement about that here very soon. What we're looking at really is not trying to play whack-a-mole with every state that may be allowing legal sports betting. We're much more interested in states that could be kind of hubs. Great example, New Jersey is a great betting market, but New Jersey's like a barbell because it's got the greater New York City at one end and it's got the greater Philadelphia at the other end. And just that area alone, we know that probably accounts for total addressable market in the United States, at least 1/3 of the betting liquidity in the U.S. So that's why it's really important for us to be in New Jersey. Why Ohio? Well, Ohio is actually a really great betting state, has a deep history in sports betting. We're currently getting killed by a couple of guys from Ohio, so there is actually some real sharp bettors out there right now. But it's also, it's surrounded by, you got Western Pennsylvania, so guys will come over the border from the Pittsburgh area. You do have Kentucky, you have Indiana, touches Michigan as well. So it's another really good hub state. When you look at the Southwest, that's one reason why we've been interested in Arizona, because Arizona gets you 45 minutes, a 45-minute drive from the Las Vegas Strip to the Arizona border to be able to bet, with us. Or you got Southern California, so it's a great neighborhood to be in, to operate that kind of like hub and spoke approach towards sports betting. And then after that, it would be very interesting. We're looking at markets down here in the U.S. South. I'm in Virginia, which I think would be an excellent addition, especially when you consider you got North Carolina and Maryland on there. It'll be interesting to see if Georgia is finally able to get there legislation across the line.
Yeah. I think they're really working on things there.
Yeah, they're definitely putting the effort in, putting the work in. South Carolina is never going to hook up the two there, so they'll just have to remain a state with excellent barbecue and no legal sports betting. But again, like because we came late and are advancing slowly, one of the things that's really important to a smaller independent company like us is looking at what the market entry costs are. Everything from market access and the deals that you cut with the local operators, the prices on that have been coming down and down and down. From where they were at their height, we'll say like 2018 through 2020. So, especially if all these people that are exiting the marketplace and heading back to their side of the Atlantic,
right.
With nothing but negative stories to tell about us nasty Americans.
Well, what's interesting though is the whole like let's go after these parlay guys and like the $20 better that you reference and things like that. It's really hard to get this message across, but for the most part, all that gimmicky bullshit that people are betting over there, if you are doing main market stuff, even with their boosts and promotions and all that crap, your line is still going to be better on the parlay than the one that they're taking. Like you go over and you put $100 on the parlay there, you get some weird promotion or something, and then net of it, you go place it over at Prime, and the line it's really easy math. You're like, well, I should probably bet it over here, right? So that's a really hard thing to get out to the market because, they like the bells and whistles and whatever, maybe Jamie Foxx smiling on the homepage or something like that. But, I guess my message to any of our listeners that are recreational players is like, hey, if you're in those states, like give it a shot because you are going to be losing less by being paid more on the lines that you're getting there compared to the Fan Kings lines.
Yeah, you guys probably hear the same talk we do. You have a lot of people who claim like American sports bettors are not price sensitive, yada, yada. And that that they have a tendency to just load up on one brand and stay with that brand. And what I would say is they're not price sensitive, generally speaking, yet. But can you name a single area of commerce where people don't eventually try and gravitate to a lower cost model to a best price? That's the reason why things like Walmart and Amazon, Costco, Southwest Airlines, and things like that. That's why they exist, because the people are eventually going to want more for the dollar that they spend on something, particularly when betting is more or less a commodity, right? We're all buying a can of Coke. Do you really give a shit what the machine it comes out of looks like, right? Like I make this analogy sometimes. Like I want to get a can of Coke. I can go up and you'd have like one of those old fashioned ones that we used to have back in like the 70s and 80s where it's just like, it looked like a refrigerator and you press this big button after you put your 2 quarters in there and you could hear something falling in there, like dun, 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 dun. And eventually can of Coke pops out at the hopper down at your feet. And you're like, all right, I got a can of Coke. Or you go to those really nice ones that like my daughter has at her university where it's like a show. And you see all the cans arrayed inside. And then there's this robotic arm that goes up and it reaches and it grabs the Coke. And then it brings it down in a nice, slow, gentle arc to the hopper where it dumps it. And then this plastic door opens up. But in the end, what do I have? I still have the same can of Coke, right? So if you want to, are you willing to pay 20% more to see the slow arcing arm pick off your can of Coke? Or do you just want a can of Coke at the best price you possibly get? And, it's going to, I don't expect that this is something that happens over. But eventually the market, like consumers, they do become smart. They do become more discriminating. And when more and more people realize that, like, well, I'm paying 20% more over here for the same thing, especially when the barrier to entry, like this whole thing, like, oh, well, people load up on one brand and they don't tend to migrate around. Like, yeah, because it's just so difficult to go from one sports betting brand to the other. Let's see, I've got how many on the face of my phone here? Like with this thumb, I'll open this one and then I'll slide it over 1 centimeter to the right and I'll open that one and be
Tricky.
able to, and that's all we're trying to say is like, look, okay, do this. If you've got Fan Kings on your phone, beautiful, use them. The great, slick, very well put together apps. Okay. But before you bet that game, or before you bet that, maybe slide the thumb over 1 centimeter to the Prime app, okay, which is just as easy and free to have on your phone, and see what's the comparative price. You know, do you pay less in order to bet that? Well, yeah. And if you pay less, what does that mean? Well, you keep more money in your pocket and you can make more bets, right? But we'll see. I don't expect us to be, a comet through the sky when it comes to success. But Adam and I are committed to doing this over the long term. We're looking at a 5-year window to see with the markets that we have right now, how we're able to eventually measure up in there and grow the business. So in that regard, not being a publicly traded company, I don't have the quarterly pressure to get out there on CNBC and tell everybody that up is down and everything's going great. So we're just going to do it the old-fashioned way.
I just want to end on that note there, that Joe, I think you're absolutely right to think that the market and the general public will eventually be interested in finding the best price. And that is a big reason why we do this podcast, because we believe that as recreational sports bettors listen to us and tune in, that they will make more informed choices over the course of their sports betting life and career, and will, become better sports bettors and more intelligent sports bettors. And I think you're absolutely right that as the market grows and as this, as things really sort of take off across the states, people will make more informed decisions, and price shopping is absolutely one of them. So with that, Joe, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you on. It's been awesome hearing, you kind of talk about the landscape, and again, amazing performance at the MGC last week. We thank you for representing sports bettors the way you did there. So really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, but to you, to Pace, to everybody out there tuning in from around the world, till next week, guys, keep beating those books. Keep beating Joe's book if you can.
Oh, come on, man. Dump a little bit to us. I got kids I got to send to college. Jeez.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Lines. Remember to like, download, and subscribe. We are on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Have a betting story or want to be featured on our podcast? Drop a note in the comments below. And if you want to join In Play Live, use promo code Behind the Lines.